Boom! We are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the Nolan Hawkeye Anthony YouTube channel. And I thank all of you for being here, wherever you may be. And of course, however you may be listening. We're back at it. It is another episode of the game preview for the Iowa Hawkeyes. In full disclosure, I have to do this for big games, especially rivalry games. Of course, I am an Iowa Hawkeye fan, as you guys can see behind me, but I do my best to give a fair, honest, and balanced preview. But obviously, I'm far more knowledgeable about Iowa football than I will be about Iowa State. But when it comes to the actual preview, I want to give it factual and what it is when looking at both teams. But before we get into any of that, I want to ask you guys to consider smashing that subscribe button. At the very least, like, comment. It really helps the algorithm out. And without further ado, let's get into this. Let's start here. So both of these teams come into this game 1-0. They both defeated FCS level opponents. I believe both of them, North Dakota, and North Dakota might not be, but I believe they are when I checked the FCS rankings. But Illinois State definitely is. Both of them are top 25 FCS programs. Both have, the last 10 or so years been decent, if not good, FCS level programs. But nonetheless, they are FCS programs. Doesn't mean that they can't offer up a little bit of a fight and a little bit of a challenge. In fact, I think that's a common misnomer, is the undervaluing that a lot of people do with regards to FCS teams. I mean, a lot of these solid FCS programs can absolutely compete with much of the FBS. But nonetheless, both of these teams took care of business as they were supposed to do. Let's start with, well, we'll start here. Iowa State defeated North Dakota 21-3, and Iowa defeated Illinois State 40-0. So we'll start with Iowa. I think they surprised a lot of people in the amount of points that they were able to put on the board. And when you couple that with the fact that none of the points that were put on the board were defensive points, yes, I would say it was at the very least, I believe 6 points. It could be a few more, were inhibited by the defense, putting Iowa in excellent field position. We had the interception by Jamari Harris and the forced fumble by Sebastian Castro. Both, I believe, put Iowa in good, solid scoring position. Iowa was up at halftime 6-0. I did the halftime report, and the sentiment was that this was just the same old, same old. Iowa was yet again going to struggle offensively. This was a sign that it was the same old business as usual, or rather lack thereof business as usual performance, lackluster performance by the Iowa offense. But I said in my halftime report, and I've said this a few times now in the various videos I've done after the conclusion of the game, including the halftime report, the offense did show signs, in my estimation, of looking better. They looked smoother. They looked more efficient. They were just really struggling with the execution, the end result. We had drop passes. We had bad throws. We had penalties. Iowa was in the first half ahead of their last year, 2023 average that put them in the top 20 for fewest penalties and thus yards against them per game. They were already past it in the first half. So, but as far as how it looked, it appeared to be better. Now, it was a very small sample size, but with Brian Ferentz, it just always seemed like, and I have used this metaphor multiple times now, it just really seemed like an offensive lineman was calling plays. Like exactly what I would expect from an offensive lineman to call plays is exactly what it was, as Brian Ferentz was a former offensive lineman. It was very clunky. disorganized, and it always just seemed like there was so much effort put into minimal results and actual numbers or positive plays taking place. And there was very little creativity. If you go past Ken O'Keefe staying behind as a quarterback coach and really assisting Brian Ferentz in his early couple of years at Iowa, after that, Brian Ferentz really struggled to bring any nuance and evolution to his offensive play calls and scheme as a whole. So I really did think visually it seemed to be better. And then in the second half, Iowa exploded. It started from the very first drive. Iowa pretty much got whatever they wanted. Really nice throws were made. And realistically, the wrinkles and the changes that have been made are pretty small, but they make all the difference in the world. And I really believe Brian Ferentz, whether it was him or Kirk Ferentz, these were, and this is why so many fans were just clamoring for this, because they were it's so easy to make these changes. Like they weren't, it wasn't like going from a pro style system to system to a spread or an Oregon style offense or anything like that. Or air raid offense. All we're really talking about is a little bit more motion, a little bit more pre-snap. For example, against Illinois State, Iowa multiple times had put somebody in motion. I believe it was Jacob Gill, the Northwestern transfer, put somebody in motion, which I actually thought they could have actually handed it off to the wide receiver for a big gainer, as the defense didn't seem to have good eye discipline and pick up Jacob Gill on the end around. But nonetheless, they handed it off to the running back, and it worked both times for solid gains. Were they massive gains? No, but they were still solid gains. And that is what you need to do to keep a defense honest, keep them on their heels. Now, better defenses will definitely likely do better against a play like that, especially if you show it multiple times. But that is the goal as an offense, is to constantly keep the defense guessing. And under Brian Ferentz, everybody knew what Iowa was doing. That's what the coaching staff, other coaching staffs would say about Iowa, that exactly what they're going to do. Exactly what plays they're going to run, and they're going to do it no matter what. And it just is what it is. So that was a pleasant surprise to see. And then, of course, Iowa, again, they hung, I believe it was 34 points in the second half, which was one of the biggest offensive outings that we have seen in multiple years for Iowa. I think it was definitely one of the best first game performances for an offensive coordinator since the Hayden Fry days, or definitely during the Kirk Ferentz days. So that was good to see. Again, it's a small sample size. It is only Illinois State. And so I don't want to overreact to it, and I caution you guys from overreacting to it. You should be cautiously optimistic. I saw an article about that, and I think that is the correct mindset to have, to be cautiously optimistic. Everywhere else, special teams, the defense, they played good. True freshman Reese Dakin in the first half had a few miscues, but overall, I think that is to be expected, especially in his first ever collegiate game. But he settled in nicely. Drew Stevens knocked the crap out of the ball, and the defense was all over the place. I mean, they were smothering to Illinois State. There was very few passing windows. I think Illinois State only averaged 1.7 yards a rush. So Iowa's defense has picked up right where it left off. And as I said preseason, I think Iowa's defense can be one of the best defenses in the Kirk Ferentz era. And of course, Kate McNamara ended up with 3 passing touchdowns. It was good to see the emergence of true freshman ex-receiver Reese Vanderzee, who, of course, Iowa State fans should be familiar with, as Iowa State was in hard on him and tried to secure his commitment. He ultimately chose to follow his teammate Zach Lutmer to Iowa. Jacob Gill also had a nice performance in his first game as an Iowa Hawkeye. By the way, guys, if you guys see I'm tilted a little bit, it's because I am icing my ankle. Unfortunately, I rolled it very bad actually it was Friday. So bear with me on that. Let's take a look at Iowa State. As I said, they had a 21-3 victory over North Dakota. I thought their defense, yes, North Dakota was able to get some yardage on Iowa State, but I think ultimately only allowing a field goal is pretty stellar. But again, they would like to get those yards down. I think the main question mark is only scoring 21 points. Now, in fairness to Iowa State, it is only week one, but the lack of a run game is definitely a concern. Let's go ahead and look at the player stats for Iowa State. Let's see here. Rocco Becht, 20 of 26 for 267 yards and 2 tubs. Not bad, pretty good. Only 6 incompletions. Rushing. This is probably, if you're an Iowa State fan, the main source of concern. Abu Sama the third, only 36 yards, but he only carried the ball 5 times. So he still had a 7.2 yard average, which is pretty good. Carson Hansen, 6 carries for 20 yards, 3.3. Jalen Jackson, 4 for 13. We'll get to the team stats in a second. Jalen Noel picked up right where he left off last year, had a huge game, 135 yards, 16.9 yards a catch with 1 tub. Jaden Higgins, 5 for 75. Eli Green, 4 for 44. So really good performance in the air. I looked at the defense. It looks like they have Will Laughlin, who, again, Iowa was in on him, and Jacob Emming in the recruiting class that they were in. And of course, Iowa State won that recruiting battle. It looks like on the depth chart, which I'm going to show momentarily, that he is listed as one of the starting linebackers, but he did not play. I read an article that stated he was not available for this game. And then, of course, one of their top linebackers got injured. He actually has an amazing story. Let me pull up his name here real quick. So here it is. This is from the Des Moines Register. This is for, let's see, Caleb, what's his last name? Caleb Bacon. The Iowa State football team was without Caleb Bacon for most of Saturday after the Cyclones star linebacker suffered an apparent leg injury that took him out of the game in the first quarter. The Cyclones are still waiting to see if it'll cost him even more time. Iowa State coach Matt Campbell said they're still getting more information to understand just how severe the injury was to Bacon, one of the most important players on Iowa State's defense. This is a quote from Matt Campbell. We don't know a lot about Caleb right now. Campbell said following Iowa State's win over North Dakota, he certainly wasn't back in a position to get back in the game. So if Iowa State is without him, it's seemingly a big loss. Although I'm sure Iowa State has the same mentality as Iowa as far as next man in, and they do have some options outside of him. Let's finish up by looking at the team stats. 2 sacks for Iowa State is also okay. I mean, I'm sure they would love to have more, but 2 is not too bad. Let's look at the team stats. 353 yards of total offense. They gave up 295 to North Dakota, much of that coming in, I believe, the second half, especially when Iowa State's Caleb, the linebacker, went down with an injury. Passing yards, 121 to 267. Rush yards, 174 to 86. And I'm sure Iowa State would like to clean that up. If they give up more than 100 yards to Iowa on the ground, I think there's a pretty good chance that Iowa escapes or well, take that back. Not escapes, is able to get a victory at home. And first downs 20 to 18, third down efficiency 11 of 20 compared to 5 of 10 for Iowa State. So really not bad. And North Dakota ran 72 plays. They only had 3 penalties for 15 yards. Iowa State had 4 for 30. But Iowa State, it looks like, had a clean game as far as INTs and fumbles. All right, let's look at ESPN's preview here. ESPN Football Power Index gives Iowa a 71.4% chance to win this game. On the betting markets, I believe Iowa opened as around a 2.5 point favorite. The over and under, I think, is 37.5. Hopefully it has it listed here. Iowa is now a 3-point favorite, with the over and under being 35.5. A lot of that has to do with both of these teams having solid defenses. Of course, Iowa's defense being elite. Game time weather, 78 degrees. And this is, of course, a home game for Iowa, but we have seen both teams able to go to the opponent's field and come out with a victory. So again, ESPN Football Power Index gives Iowa a 71.4% chance of winning. The last thing I want to point out is Caleb Johnson and Reese Vanderzee's performance. Caleb Johnson did not start the game, although a lot of people probably still believe he should be the starter. He had 119 yards on only 11 carries and 2 touchdowns. He broke away for 2 touchdown runs. Reese Vanderzee, 5 receptions in his first ever game, 66 yards, 2 tubs with an amazing acrobatic Randy Moss style touchdown reception in a sea of Iowa and Illinois State players. All right, lastly, guys, I'm going to show you guys the depth chart. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. You guys can pause it and take a look at it. Normally, I would show the team stats and where they rank and stack up in the FBS, but since we're only one game into the season, I'm not going to do that quite yet. I usually wait until the 3rd or 4th game of the season to do that. But here are the starters for Iowa State, the 2 and 3 deeps. Like I said, you guys can go ahead and pause. I believe the backup quarterback is it's JJ Cole and Connor Moberly out of Southeast Polk. And then here is the defense of starters and 2 deeps. As you guys can see, I talked about Will McLaughlin, strong side linebacker, listed as the starter. We'll see if he's available versus Iowa. And then, of course, Caleb Bacon is questionable as well. One thing I do think that is worth noting, it looks like Iowa State is going back and forth between their punters. They both gave these 2 guys 2 punts apiece. Tyler Perkins, 2 for 77, and Jace T. Gilbert, 2 for 74. But that could be more as a situational thing, as one guy is better in, a rugby style punt and short yardage, or they want to get the guys down. So, we'll have to see on that. Let's take a look at Iowa's depth chart here. All right, here is Iowa's depth chart. Jarriett Bowie was listed as the starter, but of course, Reese Vanderzee had much more of an impactful performance. I think Reese Vanderzee is more of the true starter at the X position, and Jarriett Bowie is more as an option at the X, but is more of a Z receiver rather than being a purely X receiver for Iowa. Good news for Iowa is they get Caleb Brown after he was suspended due to a OWI. He was suspended against Illinois State. They should get Cade Baroud back, although I don't think that will play much of a factor. And then, of course, Kirk Ferentz and John Budmeyer will be back after their 1-game suspensions as well. Seth Anderson should be back. He did not. He was out, I believe, due to an injury versus Illinois State. But again, everything that we saw from the guys that were available primarily Jacob Gill and Reese Vanderzee, was extremely positive. I did see Jarriett Bowie out there for some snaps, but he did not get a ton of targets his way. If I had to rank what the pecking order is at the Iowa wide receiver group, I'd say Caleb Brown is one. It's likely that Jacob Gill is the number 2 option, with Reese Vanderzee being a close 3, maybe tied with Seth Anderson. It's kind of hard to tell. Seth Anderson was a starter last year, and he's kind of taken some steps back. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I think Reese Vanderzee and Seth Anderson are probably tied. They're close to one another as far as the confidence level in the coaches with them, and starting quarterback Cade McNamara. And then I'd probably say Terrell Washington Jr. and Jarriett Bowie behind them in the 4th and 5th spots. So again, you guys composite. Iowa, it looks like, didn't have any major injuries. Aaron Graves, former 4-star out of Southeast, I believe it's Gary, or no, not Southeast, Gary. I always forget what it is. It starts with the G. Had a huge performance in his first start with 3 sacks against Illinois State. Iowa will need him massively if Iowa is to come away with a victory against Iowa State. Again, you guys can pause this and take a look at the starters for the Hawks. But again, looks like everybody is healthy and ready to go on both sides of the football for the Hawkeyes, with the exception of maybe a Seth Anderson. All right, guys, my final analysis and prediction. Of course, I do my predictions a week before the season actually starts. I think I might edit and revise my prediction slightly for this game. This game is going to come down to what it always comes down to: playing clean football and being able to execute within the opportunities that are given to both teams. I do think Iowa is the more talented team. That's not to say that Iowa State doesn't have talent, because they definitely do. It'll be interesting to see if who the lead back is coming into this one for the Iowa Hawkeyes, considering the major game that we saw from Caleb Johnson. Either way, they have a really strong running back room, whether it's LaShawn Williams, who was the primary starter last year, Kamari Moulton, who is the week 1 starter, or Caleb Johnson. They will have options. Again, it's just normal stuff, guys. Normal football. Which team's offensive line will be more imposing? Which team's defensive line will be more imposing? And be able to insert their will on the other team's defense and offense. The bright spot for Iowa obviously is the emergence of the wide receiver room. Now, is that a faux one-time situation against Illinois State, or is this something that is going to gradually continue to build? Either way, this is going to be the first true testament for Tim Lester as the new offensive coordinator for Iowa. Again, it is important to note that Kirk Ferentz is back. We'll see how much of an impact that plays on the play calling for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Iowa State, if they are going to win this game, they are going to need Rocco Brecht to play a good to great game. And they're also going to need to have more from their run game than what we saw this past week against North Dakota. Ultimately, if I look at all the phases of the football, I think Iowa definitely is better on the defensive side and special teams. Although Iowa State does have a serviceable to good defense as well. But I think Iowa is they're elite. Few teams are better defensively than Phil Parker and the Iowa defense. The offense, I would still give that nod, even with the performance. If you compare Iowa State to Iowa and their week 1 performances, I would still hesitantly give that nod to Iowa State, in spite of the better performance that we saw from Iowa, hanging 40 points. I would still give that nod to Iowa State, but it is much smaller than what I would have said in the preseason. I have continuously said, and I will continue to say, that Iowa has more talent offensively than a lot of people, including Iowa fans, even realize. Another way that Iowa State might have a chance to win this game, especially considering that this game is on the road, not that it's impossible, because we have seen both Iowa State and Iowa go on the road and win in this rivalry game. At the end of the day, it is a rivalry game. Is if Jalen Noel is able to just have alongside Rocco Becht, is able to have a masterful performance and individually wills Iowa State to victory. We have seen in years past, despite how, as a whole, elite and impressive Phil Parker's defenses are, that they are occasionally susceptible and culpable to offenses that have a elite wide receiver, such as what we've seen from Purdue with the talented wide receivers that they have had in the past that are now in the NFL. Of course, I'm blanking on a few of their names, but they definitely have had a few that have shredded up the Iowa defense. So I was able to find the list here. I actually remembered one of them before I even looked this up. David Bell, who is now with the Cincinnati Brown, or excuse me, the Cleveland Browns. Charlie Jones, who of course was a former Hawkeye, but I believe Iowa did end up winning that game. And of course, Rondell Moore. So that's something to keep an eye on, but I believe Iowa will be ready for it. And it will be up to Iowa State to find creative ways of getting Jalen Noel into the game. Again, if Iowa State is not able to run the ball better than what they did against North Dakota, it's going to be very hard to open up and create passing opportunities for Jalen Noel. So in my preseason prediction, I picked Iowa to win this game 24-14, in large part because of their defense and the fact that this is at home. I think I'm going to revise it slightly and pick Iowa to win this 27-12. Okay. I'm going to minus some points for Iowa State, and I'm going to add a few points for Iowa. But again, I wouldn't be surprised in the least if this ends up being a 10-7 performance. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if it's closer to what my preseason prediction was of 24-14. Both of these defenses are solid. They're going to be amped up for this game. But if Iowa is able to execute as they did against Illinois State, they should eventually be able to move the football against Iowa State. And hopefully their defense is able to create some opportunities for them as well. All right, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope the Iowa State fans don't give me too much of a hard time in the comment section, although that is par for the course. I tried to be fair in my assessment and not be too rude as I have been in years past. No, I'm just kidding. But I always try and be fair in my breakdown of this game. I think Iowa State is definitely talented, and I wouldn't be surprised in the least if they're competing in the upper half of the Big 12 this year. They are on a mission to do better, of course, than what they were able to do last year. So, and anything is possible in a rivalry game. And again, they do still have talent. All right, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to smash the subscribe button, like, comment. You guys know the drill. And last but not least, DBAP, don't be a pussy willow and facts or feelings, because your feelings just don't matter. I love you guys. See you guys next time. Go Hawks. Bye-bye.